So I wanted to present to you guys this framework that I got. The founder, and some people would say the father, of integral theory, which is similar to spiral dynamics as like a growth model. It's a spiral development model. And he talks a lot about a lot of his work is massive. It's dense. He's written over like 50 books. Like he's just a crazy author. He just writes so much stuff. And it's a lot of stuff that's, it's very heady. It's very intellectual. It's a lot to take in. So what I'm hoping to do is, as a creative INTP, part of my magic is I absorb a lot of information and I try to reimagine it for us to be able to absorb and be able to bring into our lives in a way that's palatable. So what I want to talk about is this concept of grow up, wake up, clean up, and show up. This is a Ken Wilber frame where he talks about, it's a method of aligning inner work and outer work. And we usually talk about a lot of inner work when we're talking about personality types, but what we're doing more is talking about how to bring personality types alive in your life, which means taking the inner work into the outer world, where a lot of the times people who are showing up into our world are taking the outer world stuff and trying to bring it into the inner world. And it's this oscillation back and forth between outer world and inner world. So what I love to propose is talking about how we can start to reimagine these ideas of grow up, wake up, clean up, and show up, tie it into what we do here at Personality Hacker and for our listeners to be able to start to take this approach and then maybe have a better understanding of some of the programs and offerings that we have that connect to these ideas so that they can understand Personality Hacker as an entity a little bit more clearly. Yeah.
And also how it applies to your own life in those ways.
Yeah.
So I just want to reference a little bit of this idea. You know, you said big models. First of all, a model, what is just in case somebody's a little bit uninitiated, like a model would be something like the Myers-Briggs system it's a framework for us to understand people, and it's expandable. You could just understand it in a very basic way, like one dichotomy, like, oh, there's extroverts in the world or there's introverts in the world. That's a basic model of understanding something.
Yeah.
Or you can understand all four letters and dichotomies. You can understand, oh, I'm an ENFP. I have ENFP preferences. So that says something about me. And you can go deeper into cognitive functions and archetypes if you want to, and shadow type material. So that's a model as an example. Another model would be something very simple like Maslow's hierarchy of needs as a model. You kind of understand where you are on like a need base. You know, are you at the survival level? Are you at safety, security? Are you at relationship and love and belongingness? So you kind of can triangulate that.
Right.
And actually those two models are good to say because they're two different styles of model.
Yeah.
One is a horizontal model. Like there's no hierarchy to it. Everyone's equal. Like I'm an ENFP. I'm equal to you as an INTP. We're not like INTP. Maybe you'd think INTPs are better.
Yes,
higher up.
I do. And it's true. And you can't debate me on that. You will lose.
Prove me wrong. That's what you're supposed to say. Prove me wrong.
Prove me wrong.
But the point is that, like, you know, they're all on the same plane.
Yeah.
But there is a hierarchy to Maslow, right? When I'm in love and belongingness needs, I already have to have my safety and security and my survival taken care of. So there's like a level to it. You level up. So it's a vertical model. It's an upward focused model.
And I want to quickly reference too, is that some people get tripped up by the word hierarchy in general.
Oh yeah.
Like we want to flatten it and just like, no, everyone's equal on every territory. And I want to delineate real quick this idea of a growth hierarchy, which is what we're talking about.
Yes.
You know, it's maturing, progressive. It's maturing through our lives. It's collecting experience points versus like dominator hierarchies, which is usually what a lot of people are being very critical of, when it's someone abuses a power or does something where they take advantage of being in a hierarchy and, you know, making someone undermining them or something like that. So I just wanted to address that right away so that someone doesn't hear the word hierarchy and immediately get turned off by this idea. Yeah. So I think that's a good starting point.
Sure. So then I think what Ken Wilber's work has done is what I understand about integral theory and what Ken Wilber and they've all done at the Integral Institute is that they've said, okay, there's all these smaller models like Myers-Briggs and Maslow's hierarchy. And they basically said there needs to be some kind of an overarching meta model for all of this, so we can kind of bring it all together to understand the layers and the complexities of all. That's the work they do, is try to understand where all the models fit together from what I can understand about their work.
Ken Wilber as a person, he talks about what he was doing in his work is he took all of these different models that he was thinking about, as some examples also, like what you mentioned was important, Enneagram, Myers-Briggs, things like that, but things like masculine and feminine, or thinking about avatars and gods, like Greek gods, different archetypes, trickster archetypes, things like that come out. The idea of being a role model and filling out your different roles. There's this idea of role person merger, and some people embody certain avatars or archetypes and experiences. Archetypes, shadow work, like all these different psychological systems and models. He laid everything out on, tables obsessively and stuff for a long time, and tried to look at what the patterns between it all were, which is like a monumental effort. Which is why I respect him greatly in all of his work. And all of that leads to some work that he calls the 4-quadrant model, which is kind of big and intense. It's really touching on this idea of interior individual, interior collective, exterior individual, and exterior collective. So when we talk about aligning inner work and outer work, it's kind of looking at that. If we go to the furthest reaches of pulling back as far as we can, I think that's as far as like I think I've witnessed is this idea of inner and outer. It's like this duality.
Yeah. And just for the listener, you don't necessarily have to know integral theory, and you don't have to know the meta model, because we're just going to talk about some of the key concepts somewhat divorced from that model. But if you'd like to reference back, we've done podcast episodes on, we called it Graves model, AKA spiral dynamics, because they're almost interchangeable. The reason why is because Claire Graves was the original discoverer of the model. So the Graves model, and then it got handed off to particularly like Don Beck as a steward. And he wrote a couple books on spiral dynamics. And Don Beck, Don Beck says in one of his courses that when Claire Graves was working on this, now Claire Graves is long dead, and Don Beck is getting elderly. He's getting up in years. And Ken Wilber was kind of this fresh student. He was like a college student when he discovered Claire Graves' work, and he just became obsessed with it. And so Don Beck talks about how this kid, Ken Wilber, kept writing them and asking them more questions. And then I would say that at this point, even though Don Beck is still alive and writing content, Ken Wilber he comes down from that lineage of that meta model. And that's what spiral dynamics was supposed to be. It was supposed to be a meta model where a bunch of other metals fit into it.
By the way, we are starting something very new here at Personality Hacker. Now, you might be listening to this years from now, and so it's something that's gone on for a while. But as of the time of this recording, it's fairly new. We're starting up an experience of our podcast live once a week online in a virtual format. So what we're doing is we're gathering a group of like minds to come together once a week to watch this podcast together. And then right afterward, we have a membership program where people can come. It's called a personality quest. And we talk about the podcast right afterward. We unpack the learning from it, how we can apply it to our lives. And then we give the entire group of people that have gathered an assignment or a challenge for that week, some journal prompts and some reflection, but also a challenge that week to go test out in their real life, to go explore in the world. All of us are going to do the same challenge that week. And we come back the following week, we talk about it, unpack it, and we get the learning from it. And every week getting together to do this, we've already been doing a few weeks. It's been fantastic. I've loved doing it. It's awesome to see people come and gather live to watch the podcast, talk about it, and go do challenges in their own lives. You should be a part of this. If you're listening or you're watching, we want you to be part of it. Currently, we're doing it on Sundays. You can find out more information to be part of Personality Quest if you come over to personalityhacker.com/quest, and you can learn all about the quests and what we're doing there and get yourself involved, because I think you're going to love this experience, especially if you've loved the podcast and you love personality types and personal growth and the intersection of those two things. It's one of the things that I am super excited about going forward with. So, and there's going to be some live elements to that. And there's a whole bunch of stuff that we've got planned around this. But right now we're just starting with these weekly gatherings, and I'd love for you to be involved.
And I've started to use the term spiral development. It's kind of like a general overarching term, kind of birthed from this idea that, yes, these models are representing the idea that we grow. And as we grow, we're usually oscillating between a couple of different ideas. Different models will tell you which ideas we're oscillating between, but it might be individual or collective sort of frames and focuses, or it might be sort of more left brain analytic and then more holistic thinking, you know, that kind of idea. We've talked about analytic and holistic thinking on this podcast quite a bit. And so bringing this idea of, for me personally, as a creative person, when I'm trying to be creative, usually I'll go as to the far reaches as I can of an idea.
Yeah.
And then I'll sort of pendulum swing, but pivot a little bit too.
Yeah.
It's like you go back and you try something opposite, but let me try something a little different. I don't want to go back to where I just came from. That's not exciting. That's not very interesting. And I'm not just saying that as an intuitive. I think we all do a version of that, just at varying speeds. And you just go back and you try something different. So when I'm talking about spiral development, it's like going forward, but like, let's try this for a while. And then let's try this other side for a little while. And then we just keep kind of pivoting back and forth and trying different things and developing and growing.
Yeah, I think that's, and I like that they originally chose a spiral to illustrate that, but I think that's very apt.
Yeah.
It's like when we grow through growth and development, there is an oscillation in our forward movement. And then that all by itself creates a certain perspective, right? Particularly since as people, we tend to have a bias believing that wherever we're at is sort of the acme of where a person can be.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, when we get into growth and development, we start to realize, oh, maybe that's not true. Maybe there's a lot of other levels.
Yeah.
Oh, in fact, there might be so many levels that I'm going to die before I reach even like maybe the close to what the highest echelon
Yeah, as
is.
far as we know, there's really no limit.
Right.
I mean, there's limits of what we can observe, and there's fewer people on the planet that gets to the upper echelons. But I think some of what we want to talk about over the course of, I don't know if I named that this is basically going to be a series, but when I show up, it's always a series. There's a lot of stuff to talk about.
NTPs, man, you never stop talking.
Yeah.
It's just got a lot of stuff, it's just a clogging up the pipes, and I got to put it somewhere. I might as well make it useful, So the idea here is that, what I want to propose is talking about this grow up, wake up, clean up, and show up aspect, and sort of redefining it for ourselves and our audience, and taking some creative liberties. Yeah. But also doing so in a way that creates a little bit more practical tangibility to it, meaning that, what we tend to do as people, there's this concept of spiritual bypassing that I think we get very wrapped up in when we get into personal growth work. It's like this idea, I hear shadow work all the time. And what I hear people referencing when they talk about shadow work is actually trying to cleanse themselves. That's more of a purifying frame, which is, I don't think is the healthiest way to look at it, or getting to a place of they think of the higher levels of development. Like if someone is new to spiral dynamics, for example, and they look at the higher levels, they might idealize those higher levels and think of them as like a place that I'll get to where I'll never feel pain ever again. And that's just not the case, and it's not to discourage you from developing and growing as a person, but that, you just get better at managing the human experience. Yeah. And I think that's what we want to essentially talk about.
So it's almost like this idea, it's almost like a Judeo-Christian concept of there is a heaven to attain. Maybe you don't do it through like a God figure or purification in a religious sense, but there's some personal growth element. I'll arrive at some quote heaven spot where I don't have my problems. I can sit on the beach and chill, or I can be zen in any space. And what you're saying is that's not really how it works. Like we're always going to be developing and improving. There's never an end point to that where we just kick back, pop the cork off the champagne and like, I've arrived.
Yeah. Well, I'm like that you use the word arrived, because to me, it's even more so like a musician believing that once they make it big, right, then all the problems go away.
Yeah.
And so that it is an idea. And I think in personal growth, and I think it's something that a person needs to keep their finger on the pulse of at the very beginning of the journey, is that there is going to be a very natural human tendency to want to have arrived. And because that actually isn't something that happens through personal development,
right?
If a person is trying to achieve it through personal development, what ends up happening is there's a lot of affectation.
Right.
Oh.
And that's when a lot of the spiritual bypassing happens. It's like, well, what do people who I think might have arrived, what do they look like? And what are they doing? And how are they showing up? And then there's an affectation of that. Maybe it's a fake it till you make it, which unfortunately, personal development is the one place you can't fake it till you make it. It's like the one that will call you on it. It's just too honest work. And so, but there is a desire to do that. And so, so I think I like the concept that the series addresses this idea that there is no such thing as arriving.
Yeah. And, I can't remember who said this quote, but someone said something to the degree of like, personal growth and spiritual growth will elevate you or it'll expose you. And that's sometimes exposing our ideals. Sometimes it's like, pushing us beyond how much we've been tamping ourselves down and maybe seeing ourselves as like this muck of a person and really like hurting ourselves and keeping ourselves from actually living and experiencing life. So this idea of not necessarily spiritual bypassing, but then also not like demonizing ourselves so much that we don't participate in life either, right? It's not about squashing the ambition of looking at a later worldview and saying, I want to try to get there. It's like, I think of it more of a healthy view of, or at least what I perceive as a healthy view of looking at a mountain, like a fuzzy mountain in the distance, and you can take any number of paths to get there. And so referencing throughout this series is going to be referencing quite a few different models that could be supportive, things that we've talked about in podcast episodes previously, or, potentially things we'll talk about in the future to navigate that road however you need to naturally navigate it to get to whatever that big blurry mountain is in the distance for you.